And so now for our next session, personalized medicine and connected health. We delayed starting this just for a minute or so because one of our panelists just hasn't arrived yet, and he may join us, we'll see. But let me introduce Scott Lundstrom, who's Group Vice President for IDC, and he's going to lead this panel on personalized medicine and connected health. Thank you.
Scott? Thank you, Joe. So, and what a great act to follow. I love the whole kind of discussion of the X Prize, the optimism. And I think, you know, one of the exciting things about the topic today is it is a point of optimism. It is a point where there's uncertainty, where there's chaos, where there's opportunity. And I think it's wonderful that, you know, we're really beginning to focus on how do we really use this? How do we take the discussion from what's been historically a somewhat academic discussion and really turn it into actionable advice that impacts health? So fortunate today to be joined by Toby Bloom. Toby is the sequencing director for the Broad Institute, but I think when you talk to Toby, what you realize is, you know, she's the equivalent of a platinum frequent flyer in the hardware business, and it's just fascinating to talk about the platform and the scale of the technologies that she purchases and deploys. And then Rodrigo Martinez from IDEO, a design firm I think that probably needs no introduction, and really I think for today's discussion, interesting advocate kind of for the consumer and usability and human factors, and how do we begin to move forward with some of this information. Hopefully George will join us. Our hope is he's stuck in a cab somewhere, but we did want to get started, and I'd like to start maybe by asking our panelists just to kind of briefly describe, you know, a day in the life and what they do and their role in the industry and why they're up here today. So Toby, please.
Okay, so I'm the director of informatics for the Broad Institute Genome Sequencing Center. So I've been living the next-gen sequencing scale-up for the last 4 years and doing all of the software. I don't work in the lab, but I do all of the software and all of the management of the data for that. At this point in time, we're bringing in about 10 terabytes of data a day of sequence information. I was just going to go to try to translate that to the number of human genomes, but it's many. It's at least 10 human genomes a day to deep coverage. So I'm dealing with all of the how do you manage this huge amount of data? We have about 6 petabytes of it. How do we compute on it? How do we get the analysis done? How do we get the right results out?
So IDEO is a very crazy, chaotic, creative place, for those of you that know it. If you don't, we basically design and innovate through design, and we do what is called human-centered design. So we basically think, what does the human need, what is the human desire for anything, and then we design around that. And mostly I have fun with traditional healthcare players and pharmas and hospitals and biotechs and providers and all of these folks, many of you here, and then have a lot of fun with sort of the new emerging players that are really trying to disrupt all of that. And we try to design just creative and innovative solutions, but mostly we just try to have fun. We happen to have a company around our fun, but it's really based on passion and fun.
Oh, thank you. So, Toby, if you don't mind, we'll start off with you. So, I think, you know, one of the challenges in this space, and we talked about it in the prep call for the panel, is this duality between science and commercialization, between discovering new knowledge and making what we already know available. How far do you think we really are from getting this data into the clinic? How tough a journey is that going to be?
This was really George's question.
Okay.
But let me try.
Yeah, no, please.
We're at a point now, I mean, I think George might say that we're close to there already. We have successes. We've seen this data used in the clinic in ways that influence therapy now. But overall, we're still at a point where we're looking at hundreds of genomes at a time, trying to figure out where the correlations are to disease, how to validate findings we have and figure out if that's really the cause of the disease and what the probability is that it's the cause of the disease. And there's a number, there's just a lot of places we're still unsure from my point of view. So let me see. I mean, I think I'd say that at every step we look at now, you see places where we're dealing with probabilities, where we're not sure that the data we're seeing is what's really there, that there isn't a mistake in the chemistry somewhere, that the sample wasn't pure enough for us to get the right information out. We don't know that if you took 2 different punches from a tumor that you would really get exactly the same genomic data from both, because it's not exactly uniform. We don't know how to deal with all of those yet. So we do have lots of information that could be useful in the clinic, but I think where we have to get to is where we're close enough to 100% sure that we got the right data out and that we've translated it from the pure data to the information about how it affects disease properly, and get rid of all of those probabilities that combine with each other to get to information we can really trust at a large scale in a clinic for 1 patient at a time, not 100 samples at a time.
Right. Yeah, no,
sense?
that absolutely makes sense. So Rodrigo, from the other side.
Toby, let me just ask a question, Toby. Why do we need to get to 100% and be sure about some of these things, while in a way there's already an industry out there with a bunch of different companies, including George's and others, and 23andMe and Avigenics and Genome and 6 others, where there's already information out there. Do we know exactly what it does? No, but for the rest of medicine, we don't know exactly what it does, and it's a complete industry. Why do we need to wait and not start doing some things that can improve from the user perspective?
I think you're right. There are things out there, but you also, so the question is, in what ways do we use it now, and in what ways do we wait? And I'm not sure I'm the best person to answer that, but you hear stories now where you send the same DNA to 2 of those companies and you get back very different results. If that's information about a disease you might get in the future and your probability of it, that's very different from, are you going to use a different cancer therapy tomorrow based on what you saw? Right. And so there are different risks with different uses, and I think we're certainly ready to do some of those things, but I think for a lot of things people are waiting for, we're not quite ready yet. But, again, I'm not the physician here. I'm not the biologist here. I mean, I'm a computer scientist by training, so you're really getting me out of my comfort zone here.
So let's maybe come back to the comfort zone. So have you seen algorithmic advances, performance advances that encourage you to a day where maybe we don't need 10 tera a day, or maybe that 10 tera a day will hold the data for 10 times as many individuals?
Oh, I think we're definitely getting there. Oh. I don't know that I could tell you when, how many years in the future I think we'll be there. Right. I think we're getting there in a lot of different ways. We will get to the point where we can analyze a genome and know exactly what variations there are that are related to what diseases, and the information you'll need to keep about those genomes is very small. Right? You only need to know what the relationships are between those differences and diseases, right, and you don't need to know the rest of the genome. The amount of data we're keeping is going down for the genome every year. The algorithms are getting better. We're still working really hard on those algorithms, and it's going to be a while.
So now, Rodrigo, from the other side, so we have this wonderful set of advancing sciences. It seems that we're discovering data that's actionable, but how do we actually bring that into the clinic? What are some of the unique challenges around healthcare workers and human factors in that environment, and how do we even take that to the consumer? All right, if we think about kind of the previous discussion, and we already see consumer companies out there doing testing and sequencing. I mean, what is the path for consumer enlightenment there? Mm-hmm.
So let me take the second one first and then come back to the clinic. How many of you are members of 23andMe, Avigenics, Genome, have some relationship with a personal genomics company? That's less than 5. That's really interesting. And there's a question of, is it because we don't know about it? Is it because we know about it but we don't think that it's still useful? Of the 5 that raised your hand, how many of you have somehow modified a behavior or done something about your lifestyle based on what you've learned in those in that interaction with that company? None. So it's really interesting because there is some interest. We subscribe. I subscribe to 2 of these companies. I have a meeting 2 weeks ago with my physician doing my annual exam, and I asked her, my father has Alzheimer's, and I asked her if I had some type of marker that gives me some probability. I do want to know, and so I did. And that doesn't mean I'm going to get it, of course, but maybe I want to do some other tests to at least know. I would like to know. So I asked her, what should I do? Are there some cognitive tests that I should do? And she's like, well, why do you want to do it? Well, because, I have some likelihood of this. Well, how do you know? Well, I know it because my genotype basically says that I have a likelihood of this. Well, who did you do this with? Well, I said I did it with this company. This is a Harvard teaching hospital physician, quite experienced, hadn't heard of any of these companies in her life. And then the next comment was, I don't think any of the information that is being put out there is relevant for my practice. That's not how medicine does it. Which is really interesting, because now how do we get into the clinic? I mean, that's a challenge. I almost want to give it everything to the people and the users and the patients and forget about the clinic. They'll kind of catch up. They'll catch up, 10 years later, which might be a way to go about it. And actually, most of the companies are saying, you're the user, you're the patient. Do we have it right? No. Is it changing every week with new information that we have? Yeah. Is it probably going to change? Yeah. But so is every other aspect of health today. And I think let's get it out there. Let's try it. Let's do certain things. Let's learn how do we even talk about it. So I think, yes, how do we get it into the clinic is an interesting question. How do we get it rightly into the clinic? And we'll talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm concerned. George's going to.
Damn that Boston traffic. They said the big dig was going to fix everything. George.
Sorry, everybody. Sorry.
So George, we've kind of been having the thread of the discussion of how do we really begin to make meaningful use of this data? How do we bring it into the clinician? How do we bring it into the modification of consumer lifestyles? How do we bring it into the practice of medicine? And one of the audience hand-raising challenges we just went through is, so how many folks here have actually had their genome done, and who here has actually done anything worthwhile with it? And so we have 1. So if anyway, I'd just love your kind of take on that. I know you're right out of the cab, but how far are we from the clinic, and how does that transition happen?
Well, we're obviously, there are lots of applications already in the clinic. There's medical genetics at a minimum that's been around since the 90s, quite healthy. And I think people tend to lose track of that when the headlines are grabbed by the direct-to-consumer products, which aren't as good as medical genetics. But I think the real question that everybody should ask themselves is, are you sure that you don't have hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, for example? It's not part of standard medical care, but it is a genuine health risk that anybody could have, and it would be helpful to know that information. So it's like fire insurance, You don't say at the end of your life, my house never burned down, so I shouldn't have gotten fire insurance. You just, even if the probability is low, there's certain things where the cost is now low enough that it's worth getting it for things that are highly predictive and medically actionable.
Right. So I guess one of my questions is, how accurate are those results these days from the various personal genome companies?
Well, I think I would say that let's just talk about not a personal genome company, but medical genetics delivery. I think they're quite accurate. If you're doing whole genome sequencing, then it's certainly accurate enough that you can hand it over and get confirmation. So,
accurate enough that you could get
SNP tests are typically not comprehensive, nor they're not inaccurate for what they measure, but there's just a lot of things they don't measure.
Yeah, I'm not sure I believe the whole genome either, although certainly you have enough information to go validate.
Yeah,
that's true,
absolutely.
but I wouldn't necessarily trust the results completely for all of that as well.
Yeah.
So I think you know, one of the challenges we have in this space is again toward that actionable advice. It was interesting. Someone from the X Prize just presented, and they were talking about, in effect, de-skilling the process of diagnosis and delivering data from these types of tests, of in effect consumerizing the technologies. Is that something you think that there's real interest in the space yet, or have we not really matured? I mean, obviously there are some startups, but you look at physician interest and consumer interest, and it's hard to find a fire there.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is the sort of thing that I think changes overnight, and we just don't know which night that is. Okay.
Yeah.
It's like the internet was really kind of pretty sleepy in the beginning of 1993, and then within a year, it went from 0 websites to 2 million, many of them commercial. And so to bet against it would be, you know, it really is a matter of consciousness raising. I actually think the quality does exist right now to do it. The cost is now plummeted. You know, it's like $1,000 for an exome and $4,000 for a genome, down from $3 billion. Not bad. So it's already a point where if you can't recover that kind of money over 80-year lifetime, there's something seriously wrong. Right?
So let's stay with that thread for a minute then. So we begin to think about changes in the environment around things like patient-centered medical home, around investing in lifetime wellness instead of episodic care. Is that something that really fuels this market, that you would expect that kind of create some of that liftoff, maybe become that night?
I don't think genomics necessarily is connected to wellness yet. I think what it's connected to is very predictive and medically actionable so-called rare diseases that you just don't know whether you have it or not, and that's highly actionable. Cancer is highly actionable. But that's really all you need to get the thing going. I mean, what the core of your question is there anything to get it going? And I think it's those things rather than wellness. Now, wellness will come along too. People will be fascinated and they'll get educated, but I don't think that you can actually justify it on a spreadsheet. But the insurance component, I don't mean health insurance, I mean just the idea of knowing whether you have it or not, even if it's rare, is, I think, compelling to me at least. Yeah.
I keep taking my glasses off because the lights are nuts.
Scott, let me take a different angle on that. And last time we sat next to each other, we started a little bit of this discussion. Last year in the exhibit area, I found 3 booths that had something that was well-designed. Well-designed in the sense that, with my sort of limited experience, that there was put emphasis in the object, how it explains, how it's used, that gives you a good feeling to use, like this, or like going to buy these, or all the other things in our life. This year there's 6 out of 25 that I counted. We have not made, for the most part, in healthcare, emphasis enough on designing the right experience. We still think so much of treating patients as opposed to delighting consumers, which pretty much every other industry has figured out a way to do, and therefore you have 2 or 3 companies in every other industry that do a darn good job of designing every single bit of that experience. So let me now flip a little bit this point you made about the changes overnight. I think that if 2 or 3 of the companies, even with limited data, even if they're only doing SNP analysis, actually start engaging in a conversation with the right tone, with the right language, with the right set of applications, not just online but mobile, how they talk about it, and start to engage people, even in some basic behaviors, that might fuel a direction that I would be very excited about. Whether I'm going to basically decide what treatment for cancer I'm going to do or not is not going to be there, completely agreed. But what I'm excited about is that there's an opportunity in this new space to get ahead of that night-to-day change that absolutely will happen, and think, it doesn't get more personal than this. So do we have an opportunity to actually invest in designing this for people and not think like pretty much everything else that has happened in the health space, which is, well, we'll think about the user once we need to launch it to the market next month. Can we get an ad agency to help us put it out?
So how do we bring consumers and physicians and other allied professionals kind of along with us here? I mean, one of the things we debate is if we're actually selling consumers genomic data, do we have a responsibility to help them interpret that, or is it just, well, you were the dope that bought it, I can't help it if you can't figure it out? Is there a parallel set of activities we ought to be looking at to help kind of bring everyone else along with us here?
I certainly think one of the hardest things about all of this is how you interpret the data and how you present the data in a way that both doctors and patients can understand it and what it means right now.
Yeah, I think, again, if we stick to tests that physicians have been ordering, not all physicians, but some have been ordering, then the primary care physicians at least know to pass it along to their medical genetics colleagues who are in short supply, and they will be in very short supply soon.
Sure.
That will mean, so if that takes hold, then there will have to be better software to help spread that wealth around, that new set of things that you can bill for, and you're already seeing a few billable items coming up in the newer genomics that's related to reproductive choices, for example.
Sure. Yeah, and obviously reimbursements fuel the market. There's just no doubt about how that relationship works. Are there areas you think are likely to go through that threshold over the next few years? Are there uses for the data, new tests, new discoveries that are going to become more common as they make their way out to physicians and they get used in their clinical practices?
I think the main thing that will happen is more aggregation. For a while, there was a phobia about doing tests, doing any tests or doing more than one test at a time, that sort of thing. What happened is, newborns were one of those first. I mean, it's not necessarily a DNA test, but you get 40 different genes tested for your typical newborn.
Right.
And that will expand, and it will extend into pre-conception decision making, where you'll be doing 100 maybe this year and 200 next year, and you'll be doing rarer and rarer things because they get thrown in for free, basically. Sure. And they are highly predictive. I mean, there's 2,200 diseases and maybe 5,000 genes for those 2,200 diseases, which are considered predictive and medically actionable. And they'll be aggregated because now it's cheaper to do a whole genome than to do 2 genes.
Right. So Toby, what does that mean from an infrastructure and a delivery perspective? I mean, we kind of take for granted the fact that we have these nodes of computational horsepower where we can do this kind of work, but then we have to begin to share it and distribute it and package it. And how challenging is that going to be?
So I guess the question is the upfront stuff, right? Once we have the infrastructure to do whole genomes for everybody regularly, we've still got, the price is coming down. Maybe that means that it becomes cheap enough and so you can build the capacity to do it. Right now, we're crunching huge amounts of data to get from each of those genomes to figuring out what the variants are we care about. Once that's better understood, my guess is it becomes much easier to do that. The storage that everybody's worried about, it goes away as a problem. There's just not much left to store. The question is what the computation is and how fast we can make that computation, and whether a lot of the computation we're doing now, because we're experimenting, can go away when we know what we're really looking for. But I think the storage goes away. The computation is still a question right now. The network capacity, that's a major issue right now. for the most part, goes away once the size of the data goes down.
Right. So then once we actually have data in reasonably sized data sets and we can work with it, then the challenge becomes analysis and actionable advice. Is that an area of interest in taking this beyond the science? I know if we look at say, technologies like IBM Watson and some other systems, it seems that as much work went into the presentation of the results in kind of a helpful and a non-threatening way as went into the horsepower to determine what we were advising. Do we need a whole new kind of set of systems for this?
Well, need is a big word, but we want it. You basically, the first time I ever used a GPS satellite, they actually showed the position of all the satellites and the azimuths and all the angles and everything. And an hour later, you had some idea where you were on the planet. But now, the way you interface with GPS is it says turn right, right?
Right, exactly.
And that's what we basically want. And to some extent, many of these things are of higher predictive quality than most of the things in medicine. It's funny how genetics gets this reputation for being probabilistic, as if that's a dirty, but actually it's less probabilistic than getting your blood pressure measured or, the fact that you're coughing or something like that.
Right.
Yeah, now, that's one that, I'm not the statistician here, but I'm actually, to me, looking at the data I deal with all the time, we're still going nuts trying to figure out what the probability is that the A you saw is really an A, never mind whether that's predictive of anything. And so I wonder, and one of the things, I'll actually ask this question because I don't know the answer. I heard somebody say this at a conference recently and I had not heard it before. They said that we really know so little about some of the probabilities associated with mutations related to disease. That, for example, BRCA1, which is the one everybody knows about, we know about really well in women whose families have a history of breast cancer and in Ashkenazi Jewish women. But that now that women are going into their doctors and saying, I want this test with no background, we don't actually know what the probability is that if they have this mutation, they're really at higher risk of breast cancer. And I heard that from a doctor who I think knows a whole lot more about this than me, but it's those kinds of things that I don't think we know yet. And so, I don't know.
So
that's a question
I think this
for
is
you.
kind of a half empty, half full thing. So there are a lot of things that genomics cannot do. My car cannot take me to the moon. That doesn't mean I'm going to not buy a car until it is enters, spatial capabilities. I think that for some diseases there is enough knowledge of the background frequencies in the population that you can go forward. And to exclude people, well, let's say we're in a standard medical genetics situation, not genomics. To exclude people just because they don't have a family history really is a problem, because a lot of people are either adopted or they're the first person in their family to get it. So we have to, we have been facing this for a few diseases that are very common, and I think actually even BRCA1 and 2 have been addressed for people without family history. So, but that'll be the big thing for the next 2 years is surveying the population frequencies of these alleles.
This is the reason that seems like one of those questions is women who get that test before they get sick can often do drastic things in reaction to getting, right? Perfectly healthy women will have a hysterectomy, right, so that they won't get ovarian cancer. And if you don't really know what the probabilities are, if you don't know that it's 80%, what are you telling them? And how do you help people? This is one of those questions that isn't necessarily a scientific question. How do you help people understand what those probabilities mean?
So let me jump in there for a second, because I don't know the answer how you do it, but I know the answer how you don't do it, and that's how we do it today.
Which is forget the information.
Depending on which article you read, between 40 and 65% of people leave the doctor's office not knowing what the hell they need to do and why, right? And now we're going to think that somebody's going to help me make an interpretation of something that is completely more, increasingly more complex than what I actually went for because I have a sprain in my ankle or something else. And the point that I'm trying to make is if we don't take the opportunity of this field that is starting, that has these complexities, that is very personal, that has this interaction with phenotype profiles and with what I do day to day in my environment, what I eat, when I run, when I take my daughter to school, and all of these things. We don't take it as an opportunity to do it differently than we've done it in every other aspect of the practice of medicine. I think we're screwing up completely, because getting it right this time means, how do we talk about it? How do we understand? What is the language? For the most part, the medical community functions for the medical community, not for people. And therefore, how do we take exercises like Genome or 23andMe or Navigenics or others that are trying to figure out how to get this to consumers and really push in the side of, let's design systems that delight people. I mean, I was delighted when Atul this morning basically said, we need to design, it's undervalued, designing solutions is undervalued, was one of his points. Absolutely. So how do we take this space and run a bunch of experiments by actually designing the end of experience? Are you doing it? Are groups like Genome and others doing it? I mean...
Well, one experiment that we are doing very publicly, actually, as a kind of a microcosm of personalized medicine, where actually the individuals might get more personalized medicine that is practical in the future, is the Personal Genome Project, where they get a ridiculous amount of personal information, and we find out, what more do they need to know. It started as a very well-informed cohort, but now it's a very broad, inclusive cohort. And they not only get their whole genome sequence, but this is integrated with their medical records. They get microbiomics, immunomics, and stem cell. They get exposure to what could be personalized medicine in the future. And we will, because it's an open project where anybody can critique it and observe it, I think that's one of the things we hope comes out of it, is people can say, oh yeah, that might actually work if we scale it up a little bit.
So how do we ensure, and I'll ask one more question here, and then I think we'll open it up to the audience for a few questions. So if you have one, there are some mics in the aisle. Please feel free to start making your way toward one. But so now we're in the process of really kind of engaging a market around this technology, of starting to work with the technology, of engaging patients, and hopefully building their trust and their confidence in it. Are there specific things we have to do to ensure that is that positive, confidence-inspiring experience for the consumer? I've been in technology just long enough that I cringe a little every time we talk about the volumes of data here and maybe some of the unstructured ways we're trying to use that and exchange it. And I got to believe that there's some kind of horrible breach or horrible disclosure to come if we don't put those guidelines in place from the beginning. Is that an important part of kind of the formative stage of this technology?
Well, it's clearly important, but it's not something that we need to be paralyzed by. I mean, in the sense that the amount of data we have here is tiny compared to the amount of data that everybody deals with every day on their smartphone or their computer when they browse the internet, and it's probably a bit more structured than the internet is. Yeah. And there's life-threatening stuff on the internet. If you respond to Nigeria or get the wrong pill for your sexual dysfunction. Yeah. So it's. I think you want to emphasize, and you don't want to be paternalistic either. You don't want to say, oh, we're not going to give you access to the data because we know what's best for you. Right. What you need to do is have a very clear, the first bit of education you need to do is, which class are you in? Are you in the class where I don't want to know it, I don't want anybody else to know it? Or are you in the class where I want to know only the things which are the most predictive and the most actionable? Or are you in the class where you want to know everything and you want to just get a constant data feed every day when you wake up in the morning telling you some new tip? And maybe there are more classes than that, but at least those three classes. And once you've got that level of education in place, then you can start working with them, I think.
Rodrigo, how do we build confidence and trust into the process and the devices?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I completely agree with George on this point. I think I would add another one, which is really interesting, doing some work with some of the companies that are doing sort of there were 5 people in the audience before you got here that actually are members either of, Navigenics, 23andMe, Genome, or something 5, right? One of the things that has bubbled up is this interest in ancestry, which is not at all related to medical. It's not at all related to likelihoods and probabilities. Just give me a window to a space that I'd never before thought of, right? And at IDEO we have 27 people that subscribe to different databases. 18 of them are either adopted or don't know who the father or the mother are, and the reason to go there is more to understand this family side of it. It's not the medical side, right? So I think, can we use that as a platform to engage people and understand a little bit more of the science, and in that way get this understanding that you were saying, and education, and not go the traditional way of, well, if you go here, this allele is related to, right? And I think that's the type of way that I think we do this also, is there's a very human side to this and a personal side to this that allows us for those stories. And I want a platform, whether it's with one of these companies or others, where I decide what's the window that I want to pick. So there may be 1, 2, or 3, as George was saying, but maybe it's a platform and you decide which of those paths you want to take. And then at one point, maybe when I'm comfortable after having 16 of my relatives there and understanding my background and my history from Poland to Mexico and all of the things that happen in between, I might say, oh, now I'm ready to talk about some of these things with my doctor.
Right. Please, sir.
So it seems that another variable that might play very largely in this, maybe that is ready before the genome, is sort of what's happening in the medical world. I'm kind of wondering with like electronic medical records, is there some piece where it's like, well, here we've seen 1 million people this year that had these symptoms, and here was the treatment, and here was the outcome. And is there something like prior to the genome that kind of says, well, using something like the algorithm that Amazon.com uses to recommend what I should buy based on what I bought in the past, to kind of say, well, here's how we should do things. And then when people start getting genomes, it makes it even better, and say, well, now we've actually been able to correlate the genome to that. But I'm kind of curious if there's, if there's a way of capturing, or some plans to capture medical outcomes, treatments and outcomes, and kind of factor that all into this equation.
Well, I think ironically that should have been happening all along, and ironically it may be that the genome catalyzes that, just because I think the conceit is that we should already be able to do that as a primary care physician plus a few specialists, and that's not quite true. There are various checks and balances. So, for example, if a physician writes a prescription for a drug that's in conflict with a previous drug, the pharmacist will catch it. But it's in no way standardized and formalized enough. And so it could be that something that is considered highly correlative and vetted, like genomics, will be the catalyst that brings this into being. But you're absolutely right. There's lots to do there, and it could really help improve outcomes if we recorded the outcomes more carefully.
I think there's a small, if not where the gentleman was going, but it's sort of at the beginning of that curve, there might be something around the quantified self movement. There are a bunch of us that track a lot of things. I mean, you just heard Ross sort of in a medical environment, but a bunch of us track from miles run and platforms like Nike Plus to calories to heartbeat to 5 or 6, and there are 80 startups that are very active in this space. Yes, it's early on, but there might be something there. I modify my behavior based on what I read out of what I get from Nike Plus after I go running for getting ready for a marathon. And so I'm starting to change my behavior. So there might be some signals there that is not exactly there, but go in that direction.
Next question?
Yeah, I just want to make just a comment, or perhaps the panel would like to comment. To some extent, I find discussions like this an enormous disservice because they assume that we understand. In the reality, we don't even understand what the genome does and how it works. The genome now gets switched on and switched off. This is only recently that we've begun to understand that. Well, what about the genome versus the proteome? There are others, a very good group out in Colorado called SomaLogic that's focusing on the proteome. And they tell you, and perhaps quite rightly, in fact, that expression data, because really what's important is the expression, not the code and the potential, but how it's expressed in an individual is very important. But I can tell you it's going to take 10, 20 years at least to actually understand what that means. The medical record people talk about. Medical record's critical. Have you ever looked at an electronic medical record in leading American hospitals? Those are about billing and compliance. They're not about collecting meaningful, analyzable data that we can relate to a genome or to a proteome. So to talk about this in the consumer space, I think we first and foremost have to realize that companies such as 23andMe, it's about making money. It is not about improving healthcare, because at the end of the day, investors have put money in and they have to get a return. So I think we need to be a little bit careful. Healthcare and medicine is really, to some extent, like witchcraft. If you look at recent studies on standardized guidelines, you'll find that about 14% or so, and it's true across the board where you look at cardiology and other areas, are based on good randomized controlled clinical studies. The problem with those studies, and the rest, by the way, are value judgments or hodgepodge of studies put together. And the problem with that 14% is they don't necessarily reflect the real world. So the fact of the matter is we just don't know. And so to start selling this as a consumer, actionable consumer product really disturbs me. Thank you.
I was going to ask if there was a question there, but apparently not.
Well,
no, obviously anyone can editorialize. I did a second here yesterday, and I think one of the challenges that we have in healthcare right now is kind of getting back to some of the excitement from the previous speaker. How do we achieve new things? How do we go out and really kind of wrestle new technology to the ground and turn it into actionable advice that improves the quality of life? But we have to get out there and work with it. We have to get out there and invest in it and exercise it and learn it. The market is the market. It persists. If the time isn't right, if the approach isn't right, these companies will fail. But it's an interesting thing to think about, and the de-skilling, the automation, the algorithmic move toward improved healthcare is something that is almost inevitable. It has to be. If you look at the economics of the current system, unless we figure out a way to simplify, accelerate, and improve the quality of some of this stuff, we're never going to get out of the ditch we're in. So maybe let me counter that I'd ask you to be optimistic about technology, to kind of recapture some of that excitement about what's new. I think, to me, one of the exciting things about this market is it's chaotic and it's uncertain, and that means there's lots of opportunity and there's lots of exciting new ideas. So, yeah.
I guess there...
Oh, please, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, I guess there is a question that I don't know if I have an opinion on or think there's an answer to, of whether companies, whether those personal genome companies are moving us forward or not.
For what? And the question would be for what?
And the question, again, the question is for what?
Because absolutely, the gentleman is right. 23andMe is a company to make money, and so is Pfizer and Philips Healthcare, every other single player out there, unless I'm missing something. And do we know all of these fields, what is there in proteome and genome? And no, we don't. Should we be having these conversations? In my opinion, absolutely. The more we have them, the better.
Yes.
So I'm just from one of those companies, so let me just sort of stand up. So I'm from Genomic Health, and I just want to clarify, we have products in the clinics today, right? We run 300 patients a day through a CLIA-certified lab. We have level 1, peer-reviewed, prospective, randomized clinical trials that validate that we have a reproducible assay today, tomorrow, and the next day, specifically targeted at early-stage breast cancer and colon cancer. These products are on the market. They're validated for clinical use. Now, they're very, very, very narrowly targeted, and they're not based on NGS. Okay. But they're still genomic tests that provide value for breast cancer patients every day, and that are both predictive and prognostic in terms of understanding what's the prognosis and will the patient benefit from chemotherapy. Okay. So these are established products are in the market. My company produces some of them. It's not some distant future thing we're talking about. I think there's a big difference between having an NGS-based product, and I agree with a lot of the issues that you raised about, are the NGS RUO instruments ready for production use in a clinical lab, but that doesn't mean there aren't genomic tests today that are based on multi-gene assays that are validated and predict outcomes and add value every day for patients.
So in the interest of fairness, I'd have to ask, is there a question there?
No.
Okay.
I think the idea that we don't have anything in the market and there's no products in the clinic, I just wanted to comment on that because that's not actually technically correct.
No. All right, one last question. And I'm sorry, sir, I think you were first. All right. Sure. So we'll try to do two more very quickly, and then we'll wrap up.
I'm in danger of being out of order because I'm not going to ask a question, but it's a very quick comment. In terms of the convergence and the acceleration, all of the comments so far were, if you like, US specific. An international perspective, the United Arab Emirates has already recently compulsory tested 2.1 million people, the entire population for cardiovascular disease and diabetes. It's already looking at genetic predisposition towards disease for its disease management program. They are already talking about genetically testing the entire population. Yep. So one of the things you need to do in America, I think, is you just need to lift your chin a little bit and look out. The rest of the world is doing things. You can learn and you can work with other people. There is a need for international collaboration around many of the topics that you're talking about.
Okay. Thank you. Yes, and our final question.
Hi.
I hope.
So when I came to today's session, the panel session, I thought it was going to be about personalized medicine and what can we do about personalized medicine. And it's turned into a genome or a genetic conversation. So my question to you is, okay, we may not be ready to use the genome for personalized medicine, but what can we do? What do you see, to your point, Rodrigo, what can we do to further personalized medicine?
So I might just say, if you guys could give a sort of a one-sentence answer each, only because we're into the break period.
Right.
Well, I think part of the reason that we have mixed up genomics with personalized medicine is it is already part of personalized medicine, and it is the part that's growing the fastest. Its cost has dropped by 1 million-fold in 6 years. You just don't see that kind of progress in the rest of personalized medicine. And so there's every reason to pay attention to that. And to say that it's not part of personalized medicine is doing a big disservice. So, I think that's why we're excited about it. The rest of personalized medicine is kind of the same as it was a decade ago, and that's the reason people don't talk about it quite so much. But they should. You're right.
Yeah, I would say that maybe it's helpful to think of personalized medicine as a spectrum. It's not like this is personalized medicine and this is not. There are many sort of degrees of gray there. And ideally, medicine was a time where it was personal in the original way. And maybe this helps us. For me, I am doing certain things with my behavior around food, diet, exercise. Whether that's medical or not, I don't care. For me, I'm personalizing how I take care of myself. So that's one degree of personalized care.
Great.
No, it's okay.
All right, great. So with that, I'd like to thank our panelists, and thank you all for joining us today.